Welcome back, viewers, to another episode of Environmental History Worth Reading for April 2016. I'm Sean Courage, one of the editors here at niche-canada.org, and I'm joined by Jessica.
I'm Jessica DeWitt, and I'm the Niche social media editor.
We're back again with a list of 5 picks of some of the best web content related to environmental history that you found mainly through online social networks like Twitter, Google+, Facebook. And you've got a good mix of picks here. And we're going to jump straight into the first one from the Toronto Star on the city's lost rivers.
Yeah, this is a interesting piece about a walking tour that you can actually go on. So I thought that was fun and a neat way to bring environmental history to the public. And in the piece, they talked to Helen Mills, who founded this walking tour. And what the tour does is it goes around and looks at the hidden waterways of Toronto, whether they've been paved over or significantly altered or are free-flowing still. So this piece looks at 6 of these hidden currents flowing underneath the city's surface, such as Lavender Creek and Garrison Creek. And it's just an interesting photo essay and little descriptions. And then it ends with a really neat map of the Mimico Creek watershed, where you can switch on and off what it looked like now and what it looked like in 1947 to see how the course of the creek has been changed.
Yeah, this looks awesome. I think I remember in a really early episode you profiled a different city's kind of hidden rivers story, but I can't remember if that was a walking tour or not.
It was a San Francisco. I think they were painting the walkways on
Right.
the pavement.
Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah. That's great. So this is really common, and then of course, for folks who live in Toronto, you know that those lost rivers sometimes return when we have flash flood rainstorms, and the water finds its way back to its old or filled in water course, which is really interesting. We move to a different geography. We're looking at the American South and the origins of soil conservation. This is a post here by Paul Sutter.
Yes. So in this, he talks about how 81 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt established the Soil Conservation Service, and this is one of the signature conservation services of the New Deal. And people assume that since it was created during the New Deal during the 30s, that it was directly related to the Dust Bowl. And cat.
My cat might come into the video too.
And cat. But he argues in this piece that this agency and the idea of soil conservation actually has a much longer background. And he goes into the way that a certain individual, Hugh Hammond Bennett, when he was mapping the soils of the South, he realized how bad the erosion was in the South, particularly in the plantation regions. And that's really what sparked the initial idea that soil conservation was something that we needed to think about and to do something about. So he goes into detail about that. And it's an interesting piece. I think in December I featured a talk by Paul Sutter that goes into some of this. And it was a piece that got a lot of traction amongst environmental historians on Twitter. So.
This is really interesting. I'm reading an article now on the Canadian context. And it's a little bit similar that soil conservation. It was about soil conservation in the 1920s in Ontario. So somewhat similar idea that there were interests or anxieties about soil conservation before the Dust Bowls in Canada and the United States in the 1930s. Here we are at the Irish Times, and we've got an interview here with a biographer of Aldo Leopold.
Yes. This is also a piece that got a lot of traction amongst environmental historians. And in this piece, Kurt Mina, who is the biographer, he talks about how Aldo Leopold is kind of worshipped and his works are kind of read kind of like an ecological Bibles. But he emphasizes how we shouldn't apply his thoughts directly to our current situations. We should think about Leopold in his time, But that doesn't mean that we can't take lessons away from what he talked about. And the main thing he talks about is how people talk about Leopold like he was an environmentalist,
Hmm.
which I think is a common way that people who aren't versed in this literature will talk about older historical figures, but that he was actually a conservationist. And we need to think about that. And also that he was he considers mine considers environmentalism to be an urban movement and a very contemporary movement, and that we have to think about these differences when we're using the works of Leopold or other ecologists and environmental figures from that time.
It's a
So it's good.
really interesting reflection too on biography in environmental writing. And it's, I wonder if there is a review essay out there, or if someone would write a review essay about biography and environmental history, because we have a lot of focus on these individuals like Leopold or Rachel Carson or John Muir or Jack Miner in Canada, and we try to find individuals as the kind of wellspring of new ideas, especially concerning environmental thought. But why is that in environmental history? Why do we look at these individuals through biography? And what do we get out of that by focusing in on the individuals? Or do we, as Mine says in the interview, turn these individuals into maybe something more than what they were within the context of the time in which they lived? All right, the next post comes from the Parks blog, a web blog about Ontario parks. And we've got some stuff here on Polar Bear Provincial Park.
Yes, so I thought this was pretty interesting because I look at Ontario parks, and in this post they describe how between 2011 and 2016, Polar Bear Provincial Park underwent the largest environmental remediation project ever to be completed inside a protected area. So what they did is there are military sites from the 1950s and 1960s that were abandoned on this parkland.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was an interesting way to look at how we're dealing with past environmental decisions in the context of parks, and just the language that they use. They talk about how it was an eyesore, how it disfigured the landscape, and then they talk about the chemical and physical hazards. But there's a really an emphasis on the way that it looks, and now it looks like it used to look like. Um, so it's just kind of interesting, and also looking at the way that the concept of a park changes when it's so far north, when so far few outside visitors are actually willing to go there,
Mm.
and it's and how indigenous communities are involved in the park and in this cleanup. So I just thought it was a really interesting piece connecting environmental history to a present project.
It also shows the rich possibilities for thinking beyond the national parks in Canada, that Canada's provincial parks take on all kinds of rather unique forms. They weren't just local parks for urban dwellers to access, but there are several provincial parks that have these really fascinating characteristics, like Polar Bear or Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta.
Yep.
And the last pick here comes from Micah Jorgensen's blog, Ecologies of Gold, and we've got another bibliography this month.
Yeah, the bibliography trend seems to be strong, and this is just another great resource. She lists probably hundreds of sources, and she organizes them geographically. This bibliography isn't annotated like the one I featured last week, but
Hmm.
last month, but it is still a really good resource, and also another excellent example of what historians could be doing with their own personal websites to help the general community at large. So just check it out.
Yeah, this one looks excellent, just like last month's.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another great 5 picks out there. If you want to read more about those and get the links, you can find them all down below if you're reading them on our website right now, or you can jump on over to niche-canada.org and find the latest post for environmental history worth reading. Thanks so much, Jessica.
Thanks, Sean.